many of us are still wondering, though, what was the motivation behind these murders? Do you see a possible narrative emerging from some of these newly released details?
You know, I think that's the part that really scares everyone is the motive, right? And I think really to the point of Kaylee's father, when he spoke out talking about how he expected him to look different, right? It's this whole idea of the devil you know, right, versus the devil you don't know. And he doesn't look like someone who would do this, but you know, what are you supposed to look like? And I think that's what's scary about the motive is why these students, why did he do this to them? And my guess, the narrative that I'm just, you know, pulling together based on my own hypotheses is that I do think he came into sort of random contact with one of them. I'm still not certain who. I believe it's Maddie or Kaylee. But I think that contact, he perhaps made more out of that contact than they did because.
So there you have an assessment from Tracy Walder. Welcome to True Crime's Rocket Science. This is a big episode. We're really dealing with one of the most important topics in true crime. It's one of the most difficult topics as well. It's not something anybody can speak intelligently on, and it's up to you to decide whether the analysis we're doing now, which is admittedly basically a week, a little bit longer, maybe 10 days after the arrest and after the affidavits come out, that is quite a quick turnaround to say, this is the hypothesis, right? And I don't know if you guys know, those of you who are familiar with me, you may even be surprised to hear this, but when Shakedown became True Crime Rocket Science, when there was that sort of rebranding and that shift, one of the questions I asked myself is, what am I really here to do? What is my purpose in the true crime space? And I thought the answer was to quickly, basically as fast as possible, provide a cogent narrative, a cogent reason, a cogent motive to address the most pertinent question that always comes up in true crime, which is why. And it's often we talk about everything in true crime. We talk about the evidence. We talk about, could this be him at the vigil? Could that sound be him? But why is actually the hardest question to answer. And so the challenge that I sort of gave myself was basically, can you come up with a why faster than anyone else and also better than anyone else? That was really the mission, and that is where the rocket science comes into the true crime title, right? And typically at that stage, I would write books. I would do books in about a 14-day turnaround. So where we are now, day 9, is around about, if I was writing a book on this case, where I would say, okay, I think I've gathered enough information to begin to put together a hypothesis. And this is obviously from studying the case day in and day out, right? You know what I mean? Studying the case every single day, not looking at other cases. In a way, you could even say fixating on the case. And then at the end of that, do you come up with a cogent narrative? Well, that's for you guys to see. Now, did you notice Tracy Walder said in this something about the devil you know and the devil you don't know? And the question here is, do we know this devil? Do we know who he is, or do we not know who he is? Let me play that back again.
To sort of random contact with look like someone who would do this, but you know, what are you supposed to look like? And I think that's what's scary about the motive is why these students, why did he do this to them? And my guess, the narrative that I'm just, you know, pulling together based on my own hypotheses is that I do think he came into Kaylee's father when he spoke out talking about how he expected him to look different, right? It's this whole idea of the devil you know, right, versus the devil you don't know. And
do you remember that was one of the things we touched on, is what is this guy supposed to look like? And then I before we even saw what he looked like, I reminded you guys of previous criminals and what they looked like. Adam Lanza, Henry van Breda, and these scrawny kids who end up being the monsters that you didn't really expect, right? And so everyone is surprised by how this guy looks. And I think that's totally the wrong approach. The approach shouldn't be what you think he looks like physically. The approach should be what he looks like psychologically. It's a totally different story. And when you take it from that approach, when you say, I think he resembles this psychologically, then actually how he looks sort of sneaks in by the back door. And you say, I don't think we're looking for a Hulk, a handsome Hulk. I think we're looking for something else, for someone else. And in this case, that certainly turned out to be the case. Just have a quick look at who's here. Sharon says, looks mean nothing really. Something that occurred to me when I was putting together the title slide of this whole thing on motive was I wondered whether Kohberger actually shaved his eyebrows, because that is pertinent in the affidavit that the person saw someone with bushy eyebrows. So I just wondered, does it look like him when he appears in court here, or his eyebrows slightly more shaved? That's quite an interesting point. Don says, thanks for that, Don. Don says, his thinking is no one is going to suspect me. That's different from I'm smarter than the system. I'll have to think about that. I do think I'm smarter than the system is part of that. And I also think some of it is no one's going to suspect me. I do know that his lawyer said something about this would be totally out of character for me. But they said the same thing about Chris Watts, right? So in terms of did he actually shave his eyebrows before appearing in court here, or just basically trim them so that they look less bushy? That's something to really look at. Compare what he looked at his court appearance in Pennsylvania. To be honest, I can't say one way or the other, but it definitely is worth considering. I don't know for a fact whether he had access to the affidavit before he appeared in court in Moscow. I don't know that for sure. So that's also something to consider. And then also, did his lawyer have access to it? I don't know that for sure, but it would be quite interesting if she said, look, the first thing you need to do is trim your eyebrows. That would be quite interesting. Okay. Now, I'm not going to play any more from this News Nation clip, but what is quite interesting is the title of the video is why did he commit this crime? And then that's not really addressed. She really addresses that he doesn't look the way you'd expect, and she also addresses the connection, the sort of almost casual connection that the perpetrator may have had to one of the victims. In other words, in about the 4 minutes that this question comes up, it's not really even dealt with. I'll put a link to this so that you guys can watch it yourselves. But I want to now shift to something else. Let me put a link right now for those of you who want to watch the whole thing. So the question that we're asking here is, what need, and that's singular, does he serve by killing? And the answer to that question needs to be a single word, one word, right? It's a little bit like Einstein reducing a very sophisticated concept and very, very complicated mathematics to a simple, eloquent equation, E equals mc squared. We want to do the same thing. We want to reduce the motive to one word, right? What's that one word? And that word has got to be better than another word, right? And the thing we're doing when we're doing that is we are, make no mistake, we're attaching a label here. And if we're going to attach a label, we need to be able to, first of all, engineer our way to the label and engineer our way back from it, right? The label doesn't just exist in isolation. You don't just pluck it up out of thin air. And so this discussion, this analysis is going to be about that. Don says gratification. Mona says ego. Rick says lust. Okay. Right. So a couple of, I just wanted to introduce you guys to the attempts to answer this question. For example, if you Google Brian Kohberger motive, like right now, that's the first result I get. The motive for the crime also remains a mystery. The documents released Thursday shed no light on whether Kohberger had any other reason to be in the area, right? And then you go through some of the top stories. There's still talk about serial killers and this and that. Then Newsweek talks about the burning question Brian Kohberger affidavit doesn't answer. What do you think that refers to? What do you think that burning question is? We'll go to that in a moment. Psychology Today, right? You've got to go to Psychology Today to get to something dealing with motive because no one else is dealing with it. This also asks the question rhetorically, does motive matter? Does motive matter? What do you guys say? Does motive matter? So those of you who are on Patreon and who've read the script, please don't, I mean, you guys know what the answers are to all of this. Please don't, sort of keep some of that stuff to yourselves. You guys know what the answers are. SM says it definitely does matter. And that's a very good point. The simulation says legally it doesn't. And that is exactly what they say in Psychology Today. They say basically the motive may be irrelevant to proving a defendant's guilt. It's not essential to the trial narrative, but it is important to know from a human perspective. You can imagine if you are the parents of these victims, you do want to know why, right? You do want to know what was this all about? Why did this have to happen, right? It's quite interesting, these most popular stories here. I'm deviating a little bit from what I want to deal with, but most popular, understanding the hoarder. Do you know successful psychopath? Shaming is an aggressive act. That's quite an interesting one. Anyway, so if we go back to Google, the burning question in terms of Newsweek, that's that article. And there they quote another FBI agent, Coffindaffer. She says she believes the motive is femicide, explaining that Kohberger was likely an individual that was rejected. Now, I think a lot of us thought that that could be the case, that one of these girls rejected him directly, that it was in a relationship or whatever. But now that doesn't really seem to be the case. Here's another one. Where is it? So over here it says a user labeled Kohberger as a narcissist. You see that in every single true crime thing these days. Why did the guy do this? Well, he's a narcissist. Every single case. Someone says he seems like a classic narcissist that killed for fun, thinking he wouldn't get caught. The New York Times says, this was 4 days ago, investigators have yet to outline a motive, right? So we are going kind of in a way with angels fear to tread. We're dealing with a territory that even law enforcement haven't provided really any answers. Even the media are sort of cycling through what has been speculated on. And what we're going to attempt to do in this analysis is provide a cogent hypothesis, right? Thanks, Flower Goddess. Thanks a lot. Thought Criminal says, what was his reason for stalking? Baby Voss says, okay. Mavis says, was he trying to prove he's smarter than everyone else? So if you look at this story from the Daily Mail, it says, it's not a slam dunk. Experts warn case against Idaho suspect Brian Kohberger isn't open and shut. The DNA could have been passed on or transferred by another person. And then they also say there's no clear motive. And in other words, they're arguing that the fact, and it is a fact, the fact that the motive isn't obvious is a problem for the prosecution, right? Do you agree with that as just a simple statement? Do you agree that, first of all, do you agree that there's no clear motive here? It's not as though he had a relationship with Kaylee and everybody knows that, and then it didn't end well, right? Or Madison. Do you agree, first of all, that there was no clear motive? And do you also agree that no clear motive means it may be harder for the prosecution to prove their case? I mean, if they can't actually say why, they don't have to, but if they can't actually say why, then could they have some problems convincing a jury? What do you guys say to that? I'm not quite sure what you say. I don't know if you're being sarcastic. Mr. Sir says his motive was to commit murder. No, I suppose in a sense that that's true, but why did he want to commit murder? Why? Why did he want to do it the way that he did it, with a knife, 4 victims, those 4 victims? Why then and there? Why, how, the way that he did it, and all that sort of thing. And you'll see what we're doing right now is a sort of speculative stabbing at possibilities. Could it be this? Could it be that? And the way that we do it on this channel is we do it in a systematic fashion. We get reinforcing evidence and we build a reinforcing case one step at a time. We're about to do that. Yeah, the method was murder. Well said. So if we go to this this site, you kind of get some of the ideas that are coming up with on social media and internet sleuths, right? And see whether any of these resonate with you. And I'm just going to really highlight some of the tweets that have come up. Let's see if I can find a couple. So here is one. This is from that article. So someone called Meredith says, I keep looking for a motive and or connection between Brian Kohberger and the Idaho 4 because it's truly terrifying to imagine that this may be nothing more than a thrill kill. So what do you think of that? Do you think this is nothing more than a thrill kill? Do you think it's just, I'm going to have some fun on Sunday night? Let's see what you guys say to that. Hey, Stephanie, good to have you here. Suraya Ray says jealousy. Can he be jealous if he hardly knows these people? So Zircon says it's more than a thrill. Joanne says not a thrill kill. That's a good point. It's too well planned for a thrill kill, right? And then look at that. The fearless blogger says the owner of a local bar said he was a real creep. And then he said, wondering if something someone said set him off. Did someone say something? Did someone post something on social media and that set him off? This is the he just snapped explanation, which is he was just minding his own business. He's a normal guy. And then somebody said something at the perfectly wrong time and he just snapped. also kind of random. He just snapped and it happens. Do you think that that is likely? Do you think it's true that he just snapped? Like that day, you know, they posted, it's so great to be around these wonderful people, and then he just snapped. That's a good point, Gina. Yeah, so that's a good point. How could it be a snap thing if he was stalking them for 4 months, right? So now we go into the next one. And all of this is highlighted. I didn't choose these. All of these are highlighted in this article. So it says here, Hannah Rose says, he seems like a classic narcissist that killed for fun, thinking he wouldn't get caught, or he wants to go down in the history books. A clear obsession with crime, and the fact his DNA was at the scene just makes it something undoubtedly in my mind. But so I think there's some truth in what she's saying here. But she's also saying he's just a classic narcissist killing for fun. Let me ask you a funny question, a question I haven't really seen. Is Brian active on social media? Because, like it or not, that is a sign of classic narcissism, actually, right? Posting photos of yourself all the time, just being on social media all the time, but also like trying to reinforce yourself on social media. Does Brian have a presence on social media? Is he on Instagram? Is he on Facebook? Is he on Twitter? Are there like lots and lots of photos of him all over the place? Because that would make him a classic narcissist. Does he go to the gym and take photos of him in the gym? Karen says they keep calling him an incel. So, yeah, I'm not saying that he wasn't on social media at all. I'm sure he was. But was he on in a classic conventional way? Someone who was constantly posting things about himself and sort of showing how much he loved himself. You kind of get that idea. So the question isn't did he have a presence, but did he have a unusually excessive presence online? In other words, lots of selfies, lots of all of that. It's not was he online? Of course he was online. It is was he online in a self-aggrandizing way? Yep, that's right. Anyway, so what I'm looking for is I don't think that he fits the classic narcissist thing, especially in terms of social media. The other way to deal with that is do you think Brian had a healthy sense of himself? Do you think he thought a lot of himself? Or do you think his problem was actually low self-esteem? Do you think he had high self-esteem? Do you think he committed the murder because he had high self-esteem or low self-esteem? Anyway, let's go on to the next one. Just a thought. What if the motive is to see if he could use his criminology knowledge to get away with the crime, right? This is not a bad one. And then to see if arrested, if he could criminal justice his way out of the conviction. Now, I think I sort of agree with half of this. The other half, I'm not sure so much. I'm not sure what you guys think. Kristen says he's in the depths of strange forums. Yeah, we are going to talk about that. But I mean, the point is, he doesn't seem to be loving himself. He seems to be not loving himself. Okay, is there another one? Shia says, I think the motive was just an obsession with murder. Could that be the motive? He was just obsessed with murder? Nothing personal, I'm just obsessed with murder. And then she says, possibly a hatred of women. If he has no empathy or remorse, ... So maybe he was just obsessed with murder. He was interested in murder, and that's why he did it. In other words, there's not really any backstory. It's just well, I'm really interested in crime, and so I'm so interested in it, I think I'm going to commit one. There's not really any backstory to deal with. Do you think that that's likely? Okay, so I think there's one more. It's quite funny. This one is from Click Debater. He says, based on the lack of weapon, lack of motive, wrong elantra, no way can prosecutors get a conviction. And then, but anyway, it's basically saying lack of motive again. That, well, we can't actually fathom a clear motive here, or can we? And then SF Investigate says, I really hope they have the right guy because I'm confused about motive. He kept his normal routine after the murders. He was not injured with cuts, even though the two victims had defensive wounds. Now, I think what you've got to point out in terms of this comment, we don't know for a fact that he wasn't injured. Right? We don't know for a fact that he wasn't injured. We also don't know for a fact that he didn't leave additional DNA. In fact, I think I saw something on Fox News where they said, someone said that there's additional DNA. I haven't been able to confirm that, but we can't say for a fact that he wasn't injured at this point. It's not mentioned in an affidavit. That doesn't mean it's not the case. And are there any more? Sammy says, I think he has such an over-control personality type, so he's kind of a controlling guy, that he was able to keep the normal routine. That's a response to that. Motive was that one or multiple of the girls became an object of his rage due to years of not getting the type of girl he thought he deserved. This, to me, is one of the better explanations. It's not really crystallizing it into a specific sentence. If you say motive was that girls became an object of his rage, well, how is that a motive? Is he angry? Well, what is he angry about? Where did that anger come from? And then you say, okay, due to years of not getting the type of girl he thought he deserved, then why did he kill 3 girls and a boy? Why, when he was 28 years old, if this is the perpetrator? And if you accept that and you say, yes, it's only about that, it's just that he hates women. What about the thing about, isn't he trying to show his criminal knowledge, right? So then is it the one or the other? Is it more of the one or the other? What is it, right? I think that is it. Yeah, that's the last of the tweets. So what I want you to do, I've now primed, if you've watched the previous video, you've been primed to think about this. And if you've been watching so far for this half hour, you've also been primed to look at what the first of all, the fact that we don't know what the answer is. The media acknowledging they don't know. The affidavit doesn't deal with it. And I would actually say, if you ask law enforcement and you could get a straight answer out of them, I think they would say, we're not actually sure. We're not actually sure what his relationships were like. That's why we need more tips to come through. But what I want you to do right now, if you've got a notebook or piece of paper, or you can leave it in the comments as well, but preferably write it down. Just take a minute and based on everything you know about this case, based on looking into his eyes, based on your assessment, what resonates the most with you in what you think is a motive. And then what you can do is you can write down a sentence. I think it's because blah, 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 blah. And then under that sentence, take one word and then have the motive reduced to a single word. And then we're going to see where that goes, right? So in other words, I want to challenge you. I want you to join me on this journey into criminal psychology. I don't want to be like giving you a lecture and you sit there watching. I want you to also be thinking and participating and trying to work it out, right? Rolona says entitled. Helen Tubac says power. What does Don say? Don says, should we conclude that he's a novice? Yes, you should. So just a couple of stabs at it, excuse the inappropriate pun. Envy, jealousy, confusion, rejection, revenge, desire, validation, gratification, hatred. Can you see it's a heck of a lot of variety in what everyone's thinking. Intimacy, payback, belonging. That's quite a good one. He wanted to finally assert himself. Okay, slow down chat. Let me see if I can do that. Just give me a second. Hopefully that's okay. Is that better? A couple more. Dominance. Thank you, Stephanie. Bloodlust, passion, grudge. That's quite interesting. Do you know that his father held a grudge against his siblings? In other words, his father held a grudge against Brian's uncles, I guess, whoever his siblings were. That is quite interesting. Some others, disconnection, patronizing, impotence, revenge, resentment, fantasy. That's quite a good one. Trying to assert his masculinity. Audrey says, when his white Elantra was recorded to be at 1122 King Road, do we know how long he stayed? Oh, that's quite an interesting question. Did he party with him? As far as I understand it, the survivor didn't recognize him. The survivor hadn't seen him before. So as far as she's concerned, no. As far as we know, no. Okay, someone says achievement. Someone says hidden homosexuality. Someone says he feels inadequate, coveting, unrelatedness, to feel, and so on. But you get my point that just in this chat, there's a huge variety of opinions. There's not one clear, consistent answer or opinion even. Everyone seems to have a different idea. So again, what I want you to do is, if you've got a piece of paper handy, it's quite important. You can turn the chat off or you can turn the sound off. Just take a minute by yourself. Think to yourself, what does actually make sense here? And write down a sentence why you think this happened. In other words, the question is, why did this person commit this crime? Or you could ask it as, what need does he serve by killing? Write a sentence there and then pause for a moment and say, what word can you take out of that sentence that is the simplified answer to that? Now, the reason to do that is we're going to do that now. And please take a moment to do that. If you're watching this on replay, you can hit pause and do that. So please do that. And then at the end of this episode, I'm going to ask you to do it again. And then the challenge is to compare your answers. Number one, has your answer changed? And number two, if it has changed, how has it changed, right? So that's what you really want to do. Violet says power. Someone else says drug infused. Okay. And so, this interesting one, obsession with death. So the one thing we don't want to do, which we've kind of been doing, is just let's take a stab. Could it be this? Could it be that? Could it be that? No. Let's not deal with it systematically. Are you guys ready to do that? So I first want to have a look at the poll. Let's see what you guys have been saying. If you haven't voted in the
Was naked.
Please make sure that you do. So let's have a look. Do you think motive is the most important thing to be thinking about right now in this case? So 54% say yes, we want to know why. I tend to agree with that statistic. I'm glad to see that most of you feel that way. Almost a third of you say no, leave it to the experts. You know, we aren't qualified to think about it. Don't think about it. Don't go there, whatever. 11% say it's obvious, isn't it? And then 8% say it's way, way too soon. So we'll see whether that changes, but I'm glad to see the majority say, yes, we do want to know why. Is there any harm with saying that? Is there any harm with saying, yeah, we do want to know why this happened, right? And I think one's got to qualify that where you say, we want to know why, but we need to ask that question seriously, and we need to anchor ourselves in a what's the word? In a very focused way on all the evidence. We need to try and find that golden thread and draw on it. Because if you just try and randomly stab, then it's haphazard. So in other words, we want to scientific, you know, the way science works is you put together using facts and evidence, a model, a theory, a hypothesis. That's exactly what we're going to do now, right? Are you guys ready to do that? So you guys may remember that I've sort of brought up Hannibal Lecter a couple of times in my videos, and I've quoted him saying, what needs does he serve by killing? What we want to ask here is what one need, primarily, what need above all does he serve by killing? So before we go any further into this, I want to just clarify that Brian Kohberger does have the presumption of innocence. Obviously, the affidavit has come out because law enforcement have reason to suspect him of something. And so what this discussion is about is discussing, interrogating, challenging those notions and seeing whether there is a clear motive, or there is a motive, let's put it that way, and whether it can be clarified or not, right? It's a question. If there is a motive, can we clarify it or can't we? Okay, so let's begin. So I think I'm going to put in chat what need does he serve by killing, right? Primarily, which need more than every other? Okay, and Susan says social recognition. Someone says challenging law enforcement. Okay. So this is the test. It's not whether we can integrate all the information within the fabric of this case, the facts, the evidence, the dynamics. I don't like the word, but the victimology. It's not whether we can integrate it into a cogent motive. It's how well we're able to express the operant criminal psychology within the authentic identity of the perpetrator. So do you guys know what, do you know what I mean when I say the operant psychology? Operant is different to operative, right? Let's have a look at, Audrey says Ali and BK and the public led the public to believe things. That's definitely possible. It's possible that she has since recognized him, but there doesn't seem to be any indication. For example, his cell phone doesn't seem to indicate that he was present with them other than near them stalking. I mean, I don't think he would need to stalk them if he was regularly in contact with them. Thanks a lot, Sam. Appreciate it. Okay, so let me just put this up here because I just think it's quite important to know about this. Operant conditioning is a kind of learned behavior. In other words, it's a way that our psychology is conditioned a certain way, right? So it says here, through operant conditioning, behavior that is rewarded is likely to be repeated, and behavior that is punished will rarely occur, right? So, for example, if you bullied, if girls mock you, if you reach out to someone and they say, no, I don't really want to hang out with you, well, then you're not going to repeat that. But behavior that is repeated, where you graduate and you get a degree and you get recognition, well, then you're going to keep studying and you're going to keep on with that. And all of us, to some extent, are involved in our own operant conditioning narrative. In some ways, society has recognized something about us, and so we do that more. In some ways, we feel that society punishes us for certain things, and so we do that less. And that may not be actually what's going on, but how we interpret it. And also, society may be not really understanding who you are, and so it may not be a necessarily intelligent process, but it is a process nevertheless. I wonder if I can. So over here, it just says operant conditioning is actions that are followed by reinforcement will be strengthened and more likely to occur. And I'm not going to take it any further than that, but the whole idea is, thanks a lot, Green Bandit, is how do we apply this to Brian Kohberger? In what way do we see his actions reinforced in a particular area, right? That is, in a way, our guiding structure. What you're trying to look for is patterns of behavior that get reinforced, and also patterns of behavior that get punished. What gets rewarded, what gets punished, and what is taking him inevitably in a particular direction, right? So can you see, instead of randomly saying, could it be this, could it be that, we're already putting ourselves within a vehicle that is now going to take us where we need to go, right? It's within that particular psychology, right? Do you follow? Okay. So as I said, the test that we are facing right now isn't whether we can come up with a cogent motive. The test is how well can we express the operant criminal psychology within the authentic identity of the perpetrator. So that sounds like a mouthful. Let me just put that in chat so you guys can see that. That's what we are challenged to do. Not whether we can do it, how well we can do it. So, you might say, I think jealousy is a factor. That's part of the answer, but it's not enough. I think he suffered from social awkwardness or isolation. Yeah, that is part of the answer, but it's not enough. It's not an accurate enough assessment, right? And you don't get to that just by going, could it be this, could it be that? You've got to go through a thinking system. That's what we're going to do now. So we all know whether it's the right answer, not because maybe it resonates, but how effective is our explanation and thus our analysis, right? It can't just resonate a little bit, it's got to resonate extremely well, right? So we're putting ourselves up to a very high standard. And so where does it take us? That's the other side of it. At the end of this discussion, we need to have gone so deeply into the socio-economic circumstances of this person and so deeply into the lived experience of this person that it actually starts resonating with our own. We start recognizing, oh, wow, I actually went through that. Oh, I know what that feels like. Oh, jeepers, I can actually see how that can be whatever. And then we need to come out of that journey and either look at ourselves or look at our society and say, isn't there something that makes us vulnerable to the dark side because of these things that may have affected this individual? So it's not enough that we just point fingers and we say, I think this is the motive with this person. We also need to say, come out of that process and say, Sherry says validation. Angela Gallagher, thanks a lot for that. Thank you. We need to also take this story that has happened in our lifetime, in the current, in the moment, that is basically informing the zeitgeist, and so what is actually happening to our world? What is happening to us? Is what is happening to Kohberger happening to other people? Are there other people that are lonely and isolated and rejected and angry and whatever? Are there other people who are whatever it is? And then what does one do with that? And one of the most interesting themes that we're going to go into here is coveting. And the question is, did this person covet? And then where can that take you? Just that one thing, coveting, being generally envious, being generally in this position of desiring, wanting, and also being generally frustrated in that. And do you know someone who is living like that as well? Or you someone who's living like that as well? Do you constantly compare yourself unfavorably to others? That's a path to unhappiness, right? And so do we live in a society that actually encourages coveting in advertising, in movies, and so on, right? And so what happens if you are in that? You didn't mean to be in that, but you are in that, and you just can't get out of it, right? What do you do with that? So we need to also address that social question through this analysis, right? It's not enough just to point our finger and say, he did that, that's the motive. We also need to point that same finger back to ourselves, right? Okay, so we're going to start now with context. We're going to start with context. Yeah, you do covet what you see every day. So at the end of this live stream, we kind of want to identify the thing that has been eating the suspect here, the thing that has been chewing at him, the thing that he's been gnawing on, during sleepless nights. We want to identify that, but we also want to say, how can we avoid the snare that he couldn't, right? In other words, we also want to make it personal. We want to make it about ourselves as well. Okay. Right, so the probable cause affidavit, a 19-page narrative, was released on Thursday. So when I wrote this, it was just 2 days ago. So it's a couple of days now since then. So it's taken 2 days in terms of my studies, my research, but also over 50 days studying this case to reach the point where we are ready to present a hypothesis. No doubt our assessment will need fine-tuning. We're not saying we're going to put out this hypothesis and it's going to be the absolute truth and the all-time truth or whatever. But we also want to put it out there now and see whether it stands the test of time, how well it stands the test of time, how well it stands up to further scrutiny. We're going to run through a series of 4 questions, forwards, backwards, and forwards again, each time peeling away a deeper layer in order to reinforce our argument. Now, again, this is why I really want to encourage you to write this down, have a pen and paper with you, because if you don't, you're going to struggle to think about this, and this is a thinking experiment, right? If you haven't done any writing down, I'm going to give you guys 30 seconds to grab a pen. I've got a pen over here. Here's some paper. Grab a pen, grab a paper, and write down these 4 questions. We're going to be running through these 4 questions 3 times. 4 questions 3 times. So question number 1. And I don't want, when I put the question in chat, I don't want you to answer it. I want you to think about it, right? When I put the question there, don't reflexively just answer it. Think about it. Don't worry, we are going to answer them, but we're first going to think about it. So the first question is, who was the odd one out? Don't type, think, pause, absorb. Number 2, how was it personal? Number 3, what is he trying hardest to demonstrate? Not what is he trying to demonstrate, what is he trying hardest to demonstrate? Again, let me just emphasize, try not to answer this question reflexively. Try and pause and sort of absorb the question and just sit with the question in your heart and in your mind, right? Don't be in a rush to answer it. Think about it. And then the 4th question is, what need does he serve by killing? So in other words, we go through question 1, 2, and 3 in order to get ourselves ready to answer question 4. Welcome, Glenn Baker. Okay. And if you weren't too busy answering and you weren't too busy trying to sort of, get to the point, then you would have noticed those 4 questions are really who, how, what, and why, right? Who, how, what, and why. And as I often say in true crime, you need the who to get to the why. If you've got the why, you've got the who. And knowing how and knowing what helps put it all together, right? Does that make sense? So in other words, you can't ask the question, or rather you can't answer the question why without knowing who you're dealing with. So you need to find out who you're dealing with, and that takes time. That's why you don't just answer the question. Who isn't is a guy at the university. Who is a long story? Who is a narrative? So is how and what, but who especially? What are all the dynamics in that person's life? What are all the dynamics in your life? So who informs the why? And they work both ways. Why informs the who, right? You're not going to be able to answer why if you have zero knowledge of the who. Let me say that in a different way. It's very hard. I wouldn't say it's impossible. It's very hard to find out the why without the who. So we cannot authentically address any of these questions without a deep sense of familiarity with the fabric of the case. The facts, the location, that's the where, the time, which is the when. And by the way, the time that this crime happened also, we didn't really realize it, but told us quite a lot about the perpetrator as well. Turns out that he was up late at night, that he was a bit of an insomniac, that he was a night owl, whatever. Also that he was a student, or seems to be. So we want to we've got to have a deep sense of familiarity with the case, but we also need to know the more cerebral and intuitive stuff, family dynamics, his relationship with his world, his setting, his environment. And we've got to acknowledge in this last crucial area, we've got to admit that our knowledge base is rudimentary. It's just getting started. So in order to prepare ourselves to ground ourselves in the meat and potatoes of this subject matter, the motive, we need to approach it with open minds, right? We need to approach it with open minds. Let me put that up. And how I want to try and open your mind, I want to ask you to stop saying whatever word you think is the motive. Stop doing that, because we are going to stop doing that, and we're going to come to the motive by a different door, right? Not the door where you just say, could it be this, could it be that? The door where you start making connections and you start intuitively seeing the answer. That's a much slower process. Are you guys happy to do that? To sort of slow down this approach, right? Can you see what is next to me there? How to stop coveting in a Pinterest world. We're going to deal with that in a bit more detail. So we need to open our minds and sort of approach this topic, the motive, through a sort of psychological back door, right? And so we interrupt that thought process by venturing inside a particular filter. And the one I'm going to be using is the biblical definition of coveting. Do you guys know what we mean by coveting? So we're going to come back to motive via going into the biblical definition of coveting. So if it feels like, wow, where are we going now? We are coming back to it, but via like a back door, right? Makes sense. Thanks a lot, Liesel. Jen says, I feel like I'm not smart enough right now. Just listen and engage. It's not that complicated. So what does it mean to covet? And I want you to try not to answer these questions, but just pause and reflect on what you think it is, right? What does it mean to covet? Well, this is what coveting is. Can you guys see that? Can you guys see? Okay, let me take that away. So you see a big dog with a small bone and a small dog with a big bone. And so what's going on here? The big dog obviously says, jeepers, I deserve that big bone. You shouldn't have that big bone. That's coveting in a nutshell, right? I think I've got another example here that I want to share. That's very contemporary. Have you guys know about Prince Harry's book? So I saw this on YouTube. Harry jealous of William. Prince Harry's angry that William got the bigger room in a castle. Now, I don't know whether that is true. I don't know if it's true, but that is a good modern version of the whole idea of coveting. A younger prince that's jealous of his older brother, is jealous of the attention. It's all about what I deserve and this isn't fair. That's coveting, right? The whole royal family thing is all about coveting. That's it, right? But I want to take it into the biblical side of it, right? Bear in mind, Brian Kohberger went to a Catholic university, and so it might be more relevant than we realize. So have a look at this. What does it mean to covet? Well, in a word, it means to desire. It means to have this really an unfulfilled desire, this constant unfulfilled desire, kind of a hunger, right? And A desire for what? Well, something that belongs to someone else, something that's not really your business, something that you can't have and it isn't yours, and you're probably not going to get it, right? They use the example here, the king's brother coveted the throne, well, or the prince in this case. To feel inordinate desire for what belongs to another, not just desire. It's a lot of desire, it consumes you. It's something that you wake up into at the beginning of the day and you are still ensconced in. You still in that noxious smoke when you go to sleep at the end of the day. It's in your dreams. It's in your thoughts. It's a noise that is part of your life. It's like a background noise to your life, right? And so it's about feeling inordinate desire for what belongs to another. But how do you think that happens? How do you feel that desire to begin with? Do you just wake up and you start coveting? How do you feel that, and also how do you reinforce that thing? In other words, what is the operant conditioning? How do you condition yourself to covet? Interesting point, Daniel. Okay. So, as I said, I do want to restrict this concept of coveting to narrow this question to the biblical sense. So, if we go to the Christian Post, can you guys see that? What is going on here? Okay. Can you guys see that? It says, do you have a coveting problem? And then you see a guy in a vehicle, whatever. Can I ask you a question? When last did you covet, just even a little bit, where you saw someone driving a nice car, or you saw someone who's quite pretty, or you saw someone who was successful, or when last would you say you coveted even a little bit? Earlier today, last week, or never? What would you say is the answer? You don't have to answer it, you can just think about it. So according to this, and it is a biblical sort of thing, it says over there, coveting is ungodly, discontented desire, but that's what I want to highlight. It's basically discontented desire. You desire all the time and you are constantly discontent. You're constantly frustrated. Run the World says a few minutes ago. Thanks for your honesty. So let me read what he says. He says, coveting is ungodly, discontented desire, passion, envy, craving, greed, jealousy, obsession, longing, or lust for someone or something that is not supposed to be yours, right? In other words, it's something that you kind of don't deserve to have, but you want it anyway. It's maybe someone else's partner, maybe it's someone else's money, maybe it's someone else's material possession. It's not yours and you're not supposed to have it, but you want it all the same. And then based on Exodus 20, verse 17, you shall not covet your neighbor's house. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife or his male servant or his female servant or his ox or his donkey or anything that is your neighbor's. Right? Rest assured, we are going to circle back if you're worried about that. The simplest definition of coveting, according to this website, is that this is what it says, let me just read what he says. The simplest definition of coveting is that he explained, God says, this is what I want for you. And we say, that's not what I want for me. What God says he wants for me, that's not what I want for me. And so what do you have? Well, there's a conflict between what God desires for us and what we desire. And you can make of that what you will. But the point is there is a conflict. There's a conflict within that person's heart and mind. That's right. That's right. He wasn't happy with himself. Now you're getting a deeper sense of his emotional reality. And this is so important. He says there's a conflict between what God desires for us and what we desire. That's where coveting finds its inception. In other words, that's how coveting begins, in a place of inner conflict. That's where coveting starts to give birth to death. And these are actually his words. I'm not like ad-libbing or anything, right? That's the language of this particular site. In other words, from coveting, you can end up with death. And isn't that exactly what's happened here? It started with coveting, it ended with quadruple murder, right? But what is the process of that? What is the process? Like, if that's the mechanism, how did it actually sort of run? How did it actually sort of flow? So now the same thing that I'm asking us to do, where you take a lot of words and a lot of concepts, but you synthesize it into something cogent. We're going to do that with what you've just dealt with, right? So in a biblical sense, what is coveting? It is discontented desire aimed at a house and what's inside of it, a sense of inner conflict or imbalance, and uncontrolled coveting gives birth to death. If you take those paragraphs that I've highlighted and you just synthesize them, well, that's what you get out of them, right? What is coveting? Discontented desire aimed at a house and what's inside of it, a sense of inner conflict or imbalance, uncontrolled coveting gives birth to death. Don says, thanks for that, Don. We'll get to that. We'll get to the drug narrative. So do you have I mean, you can say, yes, I know what coveting is, but do you have a feeling sense of what we're talking about? It's not just, oh, yeah, when you want something. Yeah, but it's when you want something so much, it starts ruining your life. It's when you want something, you think about it every single day. You think how poor and impoverished and how poorly you compare. You compare yourself unfavorably and you're miserable every single day because of that thing that constantly invalidates you. And so it says here, this is also from, I think, a biblical source. What does it mean to covet? Coveting is a powerful and underestimated sin. You can just reduce that to it's powerful. It's a powerful thing. It's a very dark force. And it's also very underestimated. So in other words, even if you don't commit murder, coveting may be ruining your life in certain ways. It can cripple you spiritually and can ultimately destroy you. A simple thing like coveting can destroy your life. It shouldn't be underestimated. And so in terms of this narrative, it's powerful. It shouldn't be underestimated. It can cripple, and the question is, did it cripple somebody? Did it cripple them so much that you take heroin for 4 years? It can ultimately destroy you. Well, did it? Did it destroy this person? Did he underestimate the impact of just coveting? I'm just coveting. I would like my life to be like that. What's wrong with that? I think I deserve better. Yes, I am going to compare myself. What if you stopped? It is poison. Laurette says, coveting leads to your own death inside. Yeah. So let's put up a picture of Madison. So she's got, there are some very sort of moving pictures of her that seem almost like a divine setting. The way the light is, there's one of her in Hawaii that's like a golden fairy tale. Isn't that often the point of social media? Is I want you to desire me, right? I want you to covet my lifestyle. I want you to want either me or what I have. That's the point of why I'm doing it. I want you to want me, right? I want you to covet, right? It's like, what's wrong with coveting? I want you to desire me. So what's wrong with it? So again, coveting in the biblical sense can destroy you. You can become so fixated, so focused, so agitated and aggravated by obsessing about what someone else has or what someone else is that one doesn't have, that it blinds that person to their own lives. In other words, you spend so much time absorbed in what someone else is doing that you forget to do something yourself. You've spent so much time looking at what they are up to that you don't end up doing anything, right? In other words, you kind of lose focus in terms of your own life because you're focusing so much on someone else's. You become blind to your own life, right? And so becoming single-minded about someone else's life means you, by definition, lose a handle, lose a grip, lose efficacy over your own. In other words, coveting comes at the cost of agency. Can you see that? The more you start obsessing and spending time on someone else, the less agency you have in terms of yourself. Thanks, Deborah. Yeah. Can you see how, as we start slowing this down, it becomes a much more meaningful conversation and a much more powerful conversation? Because it has a bearing not only on our suspect or on the victims, but on us, on ourselves, on our society. So eventually it feels like those that are the focus of covetousness are an existential threat. Let me say that again. Eventually, not on day 1, not on day 10, but eventually, those who are the focus of covetousness eventually become an existential threat, which means by spending so much time and energy just paying attention to someone else, fixating on someone else, they eventually achieve a power over you. You give away your power, whether they know it or not. You give away your power, and at the same time, you lose agency over your own life. In other words, they become the reason for someone else's misery and malaise. Now, let me ask you a question. Do you think that that's really true? Like, if you pay a lot of attention, does someone else become to blame for your miserable life? Who's really to blame here? Someone who's fixating constantly on someone else. Is that person that is the target of that fixation actually to blame? Are they actually to blame? Are they actually the reason for someone's misery? But can you see how it can feel like that? It feels like they are to blame, doesn't it? But are they to blame? So in the biblical sense, which is to say in a symbolic psychology, there's this idea that someone else is destroying you merely by being happy and presenting a perfect picture. They emphasize the watcher's lack of happiness and the extent of the imperfections in his miserable self-concept. It feels humiliating, frustrating, emasculating, and of course, all within the context of coveting excessively. So if this is the bind, if this is the mechanism that's taking place, if this is the operant conditioning, fancy word for something that's quite simple, just doing something more and more constantly, and it's creating a particular cycle of thinking, a particular pattern of thinking. How do you break that pattern? If you keep looking at something and you're constantly unhappy, how do you break that pattern? Is it rocket science? Is it very, very difficult to look away? Is it very, very hard to just do something else? Brain says we all covet, yeah, personal responsibility. So it's a simple solution. If you covet more, you'll feel worse. If you covet less, you'll feel better. Simple. Just, are you feeling miserable? Are you feeling blue? Are you coveting a lot? Okay, well, covet less. Simple. Why do you think it's not so simple? Well, it's quite simple. If you can't come out of the woods of your own life, in other words, if you can't see what's happening, if you don't have that sense of maturity where you can say, this is happening to me, I recognize I can sort of step out of myself and be the adult to my child. I can actually see that this is happening. Earlier today, my dog was attacked by another dog. I'll talk to you guys a little bit more about that later. But in a situation, you've got to be able to act almost as though you're not in that situation. In other words, you don't freeze and you don't sort of fall to pieces. You're able to say, this is the situation I find myself in, and this is what I need to do, without actually necessarily verbalizing that. In other words, you're able to rise out of the trees, out of your situation, and recognize the woods. And it's actually important that you do that frequently in your life. To say, you know what, let's see where I am in my life right now, right? Now, for a perpetrator, he's hopelessly lost in his situation. All he's doing is he's trying to go the next couple of steps, and he's kind of eventually feeling sucked down the path of least resistance, right? He doesn't have practice to say, wow, I'm in these woods, I'm totally lost, let's figure out where I am. He doesn't even know that he's lost. He's forgotten that he's lost. He's forgotten that he can interpret, intercept, interrogate that knowledge and say, yeah, but I don't want to be lost. Okay, well, then do something about it. So you may be lost in coveting. The only way to deal with that is to recognize it, to not be in denial about it, to say, cheapers, I am actually coveting a lot, right? And it takes maturity to do that, to say, whoa, 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 whoa. I'm going down this destructive spiral. I can see that. And then the question is, what if you can't? What if you won't? What if you don't? What happens then? So let me put up this image. And I've purposefully chosen what I consider some of the most beautiful pictures of some of the victims. They look perfect. They look like they are living a fairy tale. Someone looked at those pictures and felt pain and felt insufficiency and coveted. Look at the face behind me and look at the faces in those pictures. That is coveting, I think, in a single representation, meaning one face is happy, another face isn't. One face is satisfied, enjoying themselves, belonging to someone else. Another one is looking from a perspective of loneliness and pain, looking on, looking in. And all that looking confirms is that they are very, very happy. And the more happy they seem, the more unhappy I am, right? So if there's this idea that someone else is destroying you, the more you look at them, the more you realize the extent of the destruction. Yeah, change your thoughts. Good one, Jeanette. Simple, change your thoughts, but you need to recognize I'm thinking. How am I thinking? You need to choose your response. You don't just respond in a reptilian sense. You choose your response. But this perception starts to develop. Someone else is destroying me. Whenever I look at them, I feel pain. Each glimpse, each glance begins to feel like a wound, a cut, a stab, and the scale and scope of their vivid adventure becomes intimidating and painful to watch. Have you ever been in love with someone and then for whatever reason the relationship ends, and whenever you see them since then, like forever, it hurts. It hurts to look at them. It hurts to see their name. It hurts to see their face. Have you ever had that feeling? Have you ever had that feeling where you loved someone and then after the relationship ended, every single time you see them or hear their name, it hurts? Someone says no. Someone says yes. Right? I want you to think carefully. And maybe it's not like something you feel right now, but something you may have felt when you were a teenager, or something you may have felt before you got married, or something you may have felt after you got married. Whenever you look at this person's picture, and it's someone that you loved, you feel pain. Every time you look at them, there's a wound, a cut, a stab. And the scale and scope of their vivid adventure becomes intimidating and painful to watch. But you also can't stop watching. It's almost like you're watching in horror how happy someone is. You know what I mean? So why is it so painful to watch, though? That's the other side of the question. Why can you be in a situation and feel this incredible pain? Why? I think it's because it's in the face of one's own bankruptcy in some way. This person that is having their fairy tale is exposing your nightmare or lack in some area. So it's intimidating and painful to watch because it's forcing you to face your own bankruptcy in a particular area, your own social bankruptcy. Well, certainly for the perpetrator here, he's facing up to his own social bankruptcy. But the watcher cannot stop looking. So I don't know if you've ever had that feeling, now multiplied by about 1,000 or 10,000 times. And that's the situation with this person. They're feeling incredible amount of pain, but they can't stop looking. And with that looking, you get this operant conditioning. And I don't know whether it's a growing sense of rage, but next to the hurt is a sense of rage. I'm going to do something about this. I'm getting more and more angry with what I'm seeing. I'm realizing more and more what I'm being denied and just how unfair life is. And so that pain turns into boiling rage, right? And what is that rage really? Where is that really coming from? It's coming from emptiness. It's coming from lack of. It's coming from a place of lacking. That's why you covet. For whatever reason, I don't have enough, right? But some people genuinely are coming from a place of lacking. It's not just I'm generally dissatisfied. That they don't have very happy lives, right? And so he cannot tear himself away. He cannot stop himself. He can't stop coveting. And then eventually psychology degenerates into despair, right? Am I making your brain hurt? Okay. We're going to circle out of coveting in a moment, but we're almost there. Can't stop coveting, and then eventually his psychology degenerates. You've got to see this process unfold, this destructive process that's gaining momentum, that's building, right? And it degenerates to despair, right? And then within this despair, they are gloriously happy and fulfilled, and you're not. And the realization of the sheer extent of their fairy tale. I mean, each time he looks, he sees cheap as they are having the time of their effing lives. Through fixation, through obsession, it starts awakening simultaneously the infinite dimensions of the killer's dysfunction. While he's looking on, he actually is awakened to the infinite dimensions of his own dysfunction. He's like, I'm a million miles from anywhere. There's no way I could ever have this sort of thing in my life. For whatever reason, I wasn't born into this, whatever. It's just not meant to be, right? And he then becomes aware of his insufficiency, but it's like endless. It's a bottomless pit that he can't get out of. It feels like that anyway. And he feels his insignificance in a really keen way. His insignificance, his invisibility, his impotence. So what's going on is it's coveting, but from a perspective of comparison, and crucially from a position of pitiful and pathetic insufficiency. So you can't just have this conversation and say, oh, he was coveting. That's what this is about. No, it's coveting from a place of utter poverty, of utter loneliness, of spending an entire night alone. What do you do with that loneliness? You make it 10 times worse by sitting in your car, looking at people laughing and having fun while you're sitting there. And then you drive home. And then you do it again. And each time you feel worse and you go further down into that bottomless pit. And eventually it feels like there's no way out of that pit, but it's a pit that you've in a way dug for yourself. And it sort of feels like, well, maybe the only way out, they put me in this pit, the only way out of this pit is them. Absolutely. Perception isn't reality, especially in this case. All he's got to do is look away. But he's got to have the maturity to do that. He's got to have the self-control to do that. He's got to have the self-discipline, the self-possession, the agency, but he's lost all of that. He's now going down a path of least resistance. And he's in a symbolic construct of his own mind. How do you escape your own mind? How do you escape the forests, the intricate tangles and knots and roots of your own mind when you've been going down there endlessly? You've practiced going down there. How do you just not go down there? So if you, let's blow this image up. If you scroll down this image, look at what she says. How did I get so lucky? And you can imagine someone else looking at that with envious eyes. How did you get so lucky? How did I get so unlucky? Why is that your life? But this is my life. Why? How did I get so unlucky? Two high school friends of Brian Kohberger's, Casey Arns and a young woman named Bree, agreed to talk with 48 Hours. I don't know if you saw them in that documentary. The women say Kohberger was overweight and was bullied a lot in school until his senior year when he lost 100 pounds. So can you see, he did actually make an effort. So that should be overweight. He did actually make an effort, and someone that I quoted in my previous video, I think he worked in a pizza delivery setup, said he was really astonished by how Brian sort of picked himself up because he was going to rehab constantly. He picked himself up and he ended up in college. So you kind of get the sense that whatever was going on with Brian, he somehow pulled himself up by his bootstraps and tried to make something of himself, only to end up wherever he ended up, coveting. In other words, it's not just someone who's got an empty life coveting. It's someone who's tried to fit in. It's someone who's tried to be the perfect student, or tried their best, or whatever it is. And first they were bullied because they were fat, and then when they weren't fat, it didn't really make any difference either. When they were on drugs, whatever, and then when they got themselves off drugs, it didn't really make any difference, that effort. According to Bree, she said that Brian started using heroin. And these are her words. She said, you just saw him becoming more self-destructive, and he really stayed secluded. Now, there you're getting a sense of the operant psychology that I was talking about, the operant conditioning. Is what does he do when he's self-destructive? Well, he becomes a loner. And you could put it the other way as well. What happens when he's a loner? Well, he becomes self-destructive. Then you can say, what happened in this situation? When the destruction happened, when this crime happened, was this person kind of lonely, secluded? Did he have a girlfriend? Was he in a secluded place? And I think one of his students said, not only that he seemed preoccupied, but he also seemed to be not that taken care of. He seemed a little less looked after around the time of the crime. So let's continue. So this is his safe zone. This is his default setting, being secluded and then kind of going down some kind of self-destructive path. It's a place where the outside world doesn't interrupt with his sort of fantasy world, but it is nevertheless a downward spiral. Okay. Now going back to the article, both Bree and Casey Arndt say years after graduating high school, it seemed as if Kohberger was sober and getting his life together. So can you see what's going on is what appears to be someone who's re-traumatized. And what I mean is he has a horrible time in high school. He is bullied. His girls throw stuff at him. Girls are bullying this guy, right? Think about your high school. Did you sort of have some nice relationships? You go to the prom. Well, his relationship was that he ran away from girls because they would make fun of him and throw things at him, right? And people 10 years later could remember what they said, that they called him a creep, and if he asked them out, they would say no, whatever it was. And then out of that place of brokenness, he did somehow struggle out and try to make something of himself, only to find himself in a way at university back at square one. People still don't accept me. I've lost weight. I've cleaned myself up. Nobody cares. And then you get a sense from, about his mother breaking down in court and the whole family needing Kleenexes when they were talking about the extradition. Then you get a sense that his struggle was their struggle. His struggle to become someone, to emerge out of all of that difficulty and despair was his family's struggle as well. And also his family's struggle, his family weren't that wealthy. And I think his father and his mother and him all worked for the same school in various capacities. It's quite interesting just that all three of these individuals worked for a school. And so there's the sense that an education system can save you, can be the glue that holds you together. And so he goes to Idaho only to find, well, I pulled my life together. Well, has it really mattered? That all of that effort to get to where I am, does it really mean anything? It means something to me, but does it mean something to anybody else? Okay. He was attending Pennsylvania's Northampton Community College and working security for the Pleasant Valley School District. He was telling me that he wanted to get sober, and he was getting sober. And he wanted to let me know, I'm going to do better. I'm going to be better. And so that is all part of his journey. He's trying to improve himself. He's trying to make himself acceptable. And let me ask you a simple question. Do you think he succeeded? Do you think he reached a point where people accepted him? Or more importantly, do you think he reached a point where he felt like people accepted him? Simple question. So did he have a girlfriend? From what that pizza guy said, for as long as he knew Kohberger, he didn't have a girlfriend. He didn't have a girlfriend when he was at school with his sister, and he didn't have a girlfriend after school when they worked in the same sort of area. His understanding of Kohberger was that he didn't have a girlfriend. That was 10 years ago, whatever. Where are we now? Well, now he's apparently driving his car like near midnight on a Sunday, looking inside a house with 4 pretty girls or 5 pretty girls or whatever. That's what he's doing with his time. I don't think any of us thought that he was so pathetic that he didn't actually even meet these people. He was simply looking at them from a distance. I think a lot of us thought, well, he must have at least met them. Maybe he did at the restaurant, but certainly it doesn't look like he met them in a way that they knew that. He saw them and he knew he saw them. It doesn't appear that they knew it. Unless, of course, he's the stalker that Kaylee was referring to. So both Bree and Casey said that it appeared that Kohberger had a new focus, his studies in criminology. So that was something that if at some point in his life he was fixated on something, if he was, let's say, fixated on heroin, addicted to heroin, we know that he was for 4 years. And what did he do? He changed focus. He changed from that position of desire and whatever to being doing something affirmative and constructive in a way. He changes his focus and he starts studying criminology. But aren't we dealing with someone who is an obsessive type of person, someone who tends to fixate anyway? And so doesn't he start fixating and obsessing through the prism of criminology? It's not just his focus, it becomes his obsession. Yeah, exactly. He's an obsessive personality. He's an addictive personality. He's a obsessive compulsive person, obsessive addictive personality. What happens when an obsessive addictive personality covets, and why doesn't he just stop? Well, he's not wired to stop. He's wired to obsess. He's wired to be sensitive and perceptive, and he can't seem to see that it's not, as smart as he is, he's too dumb to say, you shouldn't really be doing this. OCD, yeah. So listen to this. They say his goal was to change the world for the good around him. He wanted to do something that impacted people in a good way. How's that for a model citizen? It sounds almost like Superman. He wants to change the world for the good. He wants to impact people in a good way. But somewhere along the line, the people that he wants to do this for don't seem to be very nice to him. The people that he wants to save, that he wants to impact in a positive way, are impacting him in a very negative way. And so somewhere down the line, don't you think that that psychology changes? I want to do something good for you. You don't really pay that much attention to me. You don't really seem to like me. You don't, whatever. But don't worry. I'm here to fight the good fight of faith. I'm going to do good, right? Only for that not to apparently matter. And I know that feeling a little bit, because I sort of feel like in true crime, I'm trying to do the harder job, which is tell the authentic, to do the authentic coverage, which is not the clickbaity stuff, and it's not the viral videos that are based on things that aren't true. It's cogent analysis, right? And in a weird way, society punishes you for that. It's like, you boring or whatever it is, right? And what you're actually trying to do is it's an altruistic thing that you're doing. In a way, you sacrifice in a way in order to do this to a particular standard, right? He's doing the same thing, but at some point he decides, you know what, you guys aren't worth it. You don't deserve this. You don't deserve me. I'm not going to save you. I'm going to destroy you. I'm not going to, let's see what the words are here. His goal was to change the world for the good around him. Well, that became, his goal was to change the world for the bad. Think about how this crime was like the end of innocence for this little town of Moscow, this town that had lived a fairy tale. Suddenly didn't know what had happened to it. It was a little bit like Boulder with John Benet Ramsey. This town had lost its innocence. Well, that's exactly what he wanted to do. This town that hadn't had one murder in 7 years now had 4. He wanted to rip a hole through that fairy tale flag. He wanted to do that. He wanted to say, you guys don't deserve me. You're going to get my wrath. He wanted to do something that impacted people in a good way. Now he wanted to do something that impacted people in a bad way. And then she says, people were not his strong suit. And I think through his criminology studies, he was really trying to understand humans and trying to understand himself. And I think you can really ask the question, did he succeed in a certain way? Did he at some point decide, I actually do understand people and I hate them? I understand me. I understand that I've been trying to do good. I've been trying so hard to fit in, but no matter what I do, I'm not good enough. So you know what? You're not good enough. So can you see how it actually starts as a good intention? It actually starts as, what's the word? Kind of like a good deed that then gets distorted and perverted and inverted. You see that? So put it in another way, if the perpetrator never said, I want to do something good, maybe he studied something else, like I don't know, to be a security guard or something. In other words, if he never had this fantasy of being some sort of hero, maybe he would never become the villain. Thanks a lot, Don. Don says the changing and impacting became more important than good. That's it. Okay. So even after his best efforts to transform himself, and he did, he tried to get over his heroin addiction and he succeeded. He tried to get over his weight problem and he succeeded. He lost 100 pounds in his senior year. Despite all of that effort, the world still finds him wanting. You know, you might say he was a PhD. It's not such a big deal. Thanks, Catherine. He was a PhD. It's not such a big deal. I think it was quite a big deal for where he came from. From his background, it's quite a big deal. It's quite a big deal to get a PhD if your dad's like a maintenance worker, right? And so what I've done is quite a big deal, but nobody else really seems to think that. At the university level, so what? You come from a crappy university. Why, no matter what I do, you just won't accept me? Why? What do I have to do? So despite his effort to do good, all he experiences is the bad. Everyone around him gets what they deserve, and what he gets for all his effort, in spite of all his struggle, what does he get? Where does he end up? Why do they get what they deserve, but he doesn't? Is it because of his surface? Is it because of how he looks that he doesn't get the fairy tale? Is it as simple as that? Because I don't look right, I don't deserve X, Y, Z. Do you think that's how he understands it? I mean, that's perception again. So here's the article. Brian Kohberger's high school friends say the accused killer was overweight and bullied. And then he lost weight, and they also say that he kind of became a bully as well, but in a way, a psychological bully. He would be kind of insulting, right? Now think about that, a psychological bully, and what happened in this case, someone who's studying a PhD in criminology. How does a PhD in criminology become a psychological bully? Let me say that again. How does someone with a PhD in criminology become a psychological bully? On the grandest possible scale, terrorizing an entire town. That's quite an interesting point. He's actually not bad looking now. But he was bad looking. Well, I don't think he was particularly great looking as a kid. And you sort of wonder if it's that fat person syndrome. Even when you've lost the weight, you still think you're fat. Do you know what I mean? Just trying to find some images I've got of him. Because I think it's one thing to say someone's overweight, it's another thing to see. Does he look overweight there? That's his yearbook photo, and there he's doing push-ups. And he actually wanted to join the Army Rangers at this point, which gives you an idea. That was his idea as a teenager of regaining agency. If I belong to some kind of organized squad, then I will have some agency. I will have some rank. Not the rank that society gives me, but the rank the army kind of has to give me. But do you think he looks relatively more overweight compared to the people around him? Look at that picture of him. Now, doesn't he look very different now? Look at the picture behind me and look at the picture on your screen. Doesn't he look very, very different? Very, very transformed. I mean, he's almost gaunt behind me, and here he's far more rounded, right? That's quite a transformation in a very short time. So it's almost like he acknowledged, okay, I'm not acceptable. What do you need me to do? Okay, I'll lose the weight. What happened after he lost the weight? Nothing. So he's worked very hard to transform himself, but then he gets no reward. In other words, as hard as he's worked to improve himself, is still being punished by society, right? We're talking about operant conditioning. As hard as he's working to transform himself, he's still not getting the reward. He doesn't get the girl. He doesn't go to the prom. I don't know if he did go to the prom, but he's not getting the fairy tale. He's seeing the fairy tale. He's just not seeing it in his own life. And so the more time he spends on them, watching, envying, coveting, the more he loses power. In a way, he goes from this individual, where is it? Is it at the other end? He goes from this individual back to this one. No, don't do that. Ah. Where is it now? Is it? Yeah. I'll try and, sorry, I'm trying to move it over without it disappearing. So what is happening is he goes from this person that he's become, in a weird way, in his mind, he regresses back to that invisible guy with no agency, right? And how does he feel at 28? I'm not going to accept that. Are there any animal behavioral studies that you know of? I can talk to you about animal behavior, like very specifically about what happened today. Yeah. Animal behavior and aggression is very much an important narrative here. How aggression comes out of a immature animal, and how, yeah, and group behavior. So that is worth talking about. But in any event, he's a 28-year-old and he feels like he hasn't gotten anywhere since he was this person. All of that effort, all of that building himself up, even the PhD, and yet the world still sees him as this guy. But he's not this guy, as that guy. But the world still sees him. His interpretation is the world sees him still as that guy. He's still not good enough. Yeah, he can't fit in. So here we are. So the more time he spends on them, watching, envying, coveting, the more he loses power. And he has been spending a lot of time. The more he loses power, the more agency he gives up. As time goes on, he experiences it as them benefiting at his expense. They want to be looked at. They are on Instagram enjoying all their attention. They benefit at his expense. Their happiness comes at the cost of his own. And the more he entertains this thought, the more a seed of revenge and retribution begins to germinate. In order to not be destroyed by you, and that is already coming from this feeling, I am being destroyed by you. In order not to be destroyed by you, I have to destroy you. In order to stop this pain, to transcend this humiliating exposure to coveting, I must destroy the source. In order to stop seeing what I'm seeing, I need to destroy what I'm seeing. There's clearly a ridiculously simple way to interrupt this vicious programming cycle, right? What is the simple solution to what's going on here? Just like this. Just like that, do that, and none of these crimes will happen. What's the simple solution to getting out of this thought process? In the Chris Watts case, the simple solution was, why didn't he just get a divorce? In this case, the simple solution is, why didn't the suspect simply look away? Why didn't he simply focus on something else? Why didn't he simply stop comparing himself? Well, someone said it earlier. Not so easy to do if you've got an addictive, compulsive personality. Because he's an addict. Self-discipline isn't his thing, neither is self-control, right? That's why it's not so simple for him. And in this respect, I want to bring up a comment. I would rather not do it here, but since we are here, I think it's probably best that I do. Just because I would like to continue the thread that we're building. But someone said that part didn't resonate with me. Because didn't it take a lot of effort to lose weight? Didn't it take a lot of effort to go to rehab and overcome his addiction, right? So let me put this on screen. I know it's necessary and greatly appreciate blah, blah, blah. One area that's not sitting well with me is self-discipline isn't his thing. Neither is self-control. I'd imagine it takes a lot of self-discipline to lose 100 pounds. That's true. And self-control to adhere to a strict vegan diet. In other words, someone's saying, that doesn't resonate with me, that self-discipline isn't his thing. This isn't self-discipline. This is obsession. Being on a strict vegan diet isn't self-discipline. It's being fixated and excessive, right? He basically steers from one level of fixation, obsession to another. In other words, he doesn't self-moderate, right? You also get that sense, even when he is marking his students, he marks them to a too high standard that half the class protest and are very unhappy. And what that shows is a lack of maturity, a lack of knowledge of what's appropriate. It shows a lack of emotional intelligence. And all of that then leads into a lack of self-discipline. One way that you could see self-discipline is just if you could say self-discipline you get if you've got agency. Self-control you've got if you've got agency and maturity. And like a sense of personal power, right, over yourself. If you're an addictive personality, you don't have self-discipline. Losing weight wasn't so much discipline, I think, as an obsession to fit in. It's self-control, but with a compulsion attached to it, right? All of that looking out the car window is a kind of disciplined, what do you call it? Disciplined person watching, but what is fueling that is obsession, not something else, not something good. The other thing to mention in terms of this comment is he is a person that is conflicted. He is a contradiction. I mean, the mere fact, and this is within the psychology of did this suspect commit this crime? Well, if so, then you have the contradiction of someone who's studying criminology, how to catch a criminal, and then what does he do? He becomes the criminal and catch me if you can. That's a contradiction. And that's a contradiction. The crime is his most authentic expression of himself at that moment. And it then becomes the definitive description of who he is, which is a contradiction. He's a contradiction. He's an intelligent guy doing something very stupid. He's a student that is there to build himself up, that seems to be destroying those people around him, those that he said that he was going to save and do good. It's a contradiction. And it's a contradiction I think he can't really live with anymore. He needs to reconcile it in some way. It's a contradiction that robs him of all his agency. And so even in a scenario where a 20-year-old slip of a girl, and I want to put this picture up. I want to put, Don says, revenge, okay. I want to put this picture up and I want to ask you, how can you imagine that this person who's much shorter and slighter than the perpetrator, how is she any kind of threat to him? How is she any kind of physical threat to him? Moon says, maybe his mentality is, if I can't have you, nobody can. But how is she, if they've never really even met, if they've never had a relationship, how is she a threat to him? You should know this because we've already kind of covered it. So in a scenario where, let's imagine, a 20-year-old slip of a girl who has perhaps never even seen someone who is 6 foot tall watching her and who couldn't possibly be any kind of physical threat to him, she nevertheless does pose a threat to him through her very existence. Well, in what way? In what way does she pose a threat? Right? It's her very existence is a powerful social threat. She proves that he has no social currency. She proves that he has no social power. Right? She has got tremendous social power, tremendous social currency. Some of it's from her how attractive she is. Some of it's from her youth, various reasons why she's as popular as she is. Some of it is that she's socialized. Some of it is that she's well brought up. Some of it is that she's got a good attitude, right? Some of it is that she takes care of herself. Someone says, why infantilize her? I'm not infantilizing her. What I'm trying to do is show you that she's no actual threat to him in a physical sense, but in a social sense, she certainly is. And that's not what an infant does. Her social power is significant, even though she's 20 years old. He's 28 years old, and he has no social power, even though he gives classes to, what is it, 150 kids. They don't really seem to like him or respect him. Even though he's been in the fabric of the university for years now, he still hasn't really developed any social power, whereas she has. Look at how much she's accumulated. Look at how much Kaylee's accumulated. Look at how much everyone in that house have accumulated and are enjoying. So can you say that she doesn't pose a threat to him? There's a twofold answer. Number one, she does pose a threat to him, but it's a kind of a symbolic threat. It's not a physical, existential threat. It's a symbolic, social threat. And a lot of that's in his mind. In other words, he doesn't need to go to her for her to reject him or say anything. Him merely looking at her is a sort of a confirmation of the reality of what's going on, what she's enjoying and what he's not, what she's getting. And her social media is full of things of, and even her father said, she was getting the life she deserved. How does that feel to the person who isn't? Great, you're getting the life you deserve. Well, I'm not. Are you happy for that person? The probable cause affidavit doesn't address or even attempt to address or deal with the question of motive, and we are endeavoring to do precisely that in this detailed, in-depth analysis. And that's how we come back to motive. We were talking about coveting for a long time, and then through the back door of coveting, we came into this arena, right, of Kohberger as someone who might be coveting. And then you ask the question, does that fit? Does this idea of, thanks a lot, Sultry Cat Lady, cool name. Does this idea of coveting not just fit this perpetrator, but does it particularly fit this perpetrator? Now, you could apply this and say, no, but this applies to anyone. This isn't any kind of clever application. You could apply, Chris Watts was coveting, Jodi Arias was coveting, Casey Anthony was coveting, everyone was coveting something. Yes, everyone is coveting, but the level of coveting in this story is extreme. The level of stalking and being somewhere where you're not and wanting something that you don't have is extreme, right? In the Chris Watts case, he has a home, he has kids, he has people around him, he has a job, he has a certain amount of that people recognize him. He has a relationship with his wife, he has a relationship with co-workers, right? He does, to some extent, I wouldn't even say covet because he's already in a relationship with a mistress, right? But I guess he does covet being in a different life, a life that he shouldn't really be able to have with someone else. But it's at a much, much lower scale than the coveting that we're seeing here. And so how does he learn to covet? Well, he's coveted his whole life. And then he allows himself to covet when he's in Idaho. He allows that. He doesn't discipline himself. He doesn't stop himself. Wolfie says, I don't know if you can boil down his motive to one word. I think you can, and I think you should. And so what you've said there, all of those words are important, but you need to synthesize them in someone. That's what you're trying to do here. So at the end of this, we are going to come up with one word. You can decide whether you don't. Some of you are going to say, I don't really like that, but I disagree. So we are about to delve into a very niche area, an area where angels fear to tread. We're about to go into that territory right now. I'm just kind of giving you a warning. You need to prepare yourself. This is criminal psychology, right? This is criminal psychology. You don't go into this lightly. That's why I'm putting a pretty severe image in front of you. You should get chills because that's what it is. Even when experts and authors deal with this topic, and as long as I've written books about this, when I go to what the experts say, when I go to what other authors, people who write about true crime, they invariably dodge this by throwing labels at it or by only examining it briefly and superficially. On this channel, what we try to do is we try to take off our socks and feel our way into the oversized shoes of the perpetrator. We try to walk in his shoes. It's not comfortable. It's not pleasant. What happens when we do? What happens when we take some time to feel what those shoes feel like? What happens when we do that? And how intuitively are we able to step into his psychology? Let me say that again. How intuitively, so far, would you say we're doing a good job at intuitively interrogating his psychology?
Which brings us at last to the moment of truth, wherein the fundamental flaw is ultimately expressed. And
so this is the moment of truth. Are you sure you want to hear this? We're now going to go through those 4 questions, and this time we're going to answer them. Okay, 4 questions. Number 1, who was the odd one out? Brian Kohberger is the odd one out, apparently. Was Kohberger on the outside looking in? And was he on the outside looking in because he was a particularly odd fellow? Simple question. Think about the words again, right? Who is the odd one out? Part of that question is asking the question, is someone in this story particularly odd? Is the person in this story particularly odd? Is what others say about this person that he's particularly odd? Does he experience himself to be particularly odd? Next question. How was it personal? So obviously, how was it personal for Brian? It was a personal attack. In other words, the crime was a personal attack because a knife attack is up close and personal. In other words, first of all, if you say, how is it personal? It is personal. So don't make the mistake of thinking, I'm not sure how it's personal, so maybe it wasn't personal. It is personal. It's a personal attack because a knife attack is up close and personal. But if he didn't actually know any of the victims, how could it still be personal? It was personal because of the perpetrator's emasculated psychology, which was a long time in the making. It wasn't something that happened the day before, a week before, a month before, a semester before, that year, the previous year, the year before that. It was something years in the making. It was something that started festering at high school, something that he was trying to overcome, but he could not overcome that emasculated psychology. It was a constant struggle. So in a word, It was personal because of a long history of esteem issues, specifically low self-esteem. He was battling with low self-esteem, and that is a personal battle, right? That's a very personal battle. Number 3, and this is where it really starts to come together. What is he trying hardest to demonstrate? And here we are talking specifically about, in the commission of the crime, what is he trying to show us? What is he trying to say, right? It's not just what is he trying hardest to demonstrate. In the commission of this crime, what is he trying hardest to demonstrate? He's demonstrating his intelligence, but within the theater of real life, and yet still within the campus setting and a college context. His intelligence is one way to show his agency. And that then brings us to, what need does he serve by killing? What need does he serve by killing? It's a kind of an indirect way of saying why. Why is he doing this? There we have the answer. Well done. He's trying to regain his power. As simple as that. It's as simple as that. There's been a lifelong power struggle, and by killing, he achieves agency, he imposes himself, he exerts himself into becoming something. In the process of destroying them, he becomes something, just as they did to him. And he repeats this 4 times. He exerts himself into becoming something in the process of destroying them. And then he does it again. He exerts himself and becomes something in the process of destroying them, just as they did to him. And he repeats it again. This repetition is a clue into a pattern of invalidation is also felt. In other words, the reason that he needed to kill 4 times shows the scale and scope of the powerlessness, the invalidation, the thing that he needs to show, the thing that he needs to communicate. It is, in a sense, about annihilation and rebirth. You kind of had that with the Chris Watts case as well. In a way, you could even say Casey Anthony. In fact, a lot of crimes, a lot of murders are annihilation in order for a fairy tale to be born or to be allowed to exist. It's annihilation and rebirth. People often don't see that. It's just someone died. Why? Well, because someone wanted their fairy tale, because someone threatened that fairy tale. So you may think we figured out the motive. You may say, wow, that's incredible. We figured out the motive. By crystallizing the substance into a few simple terms. But even if we are accurate, you might say, you know what, I don't know about that. Even if we were accurate, someone was odd. Someone was suffering for years with low self-esteem. So much so that he eventually felt so emasculated, he experienced it as a prolonged, excruciating social death. And within his context, within this context, as a PhD studying criminology, he figured the way to validate himself was through a demonstration of his intelligence in committing a perfect murder. The crime itself, but also the symbol of the crime, resets the power struggle. It places the perpetrator at the top of the community. Now they fear him and respect him, even though they don't know who he is. They just know he's out there. He's out there, and as long as he's out there, he's outsmarting them, even though in reality, he's actually in there outsmarting them. Even if we're accurate in our assessment, these are still labels attached to a shallow appreciation of the underlying reality, right? So let's try and do better. Let's do a second flyover, this time slowing down even more, ruminating a little on each point and attempting to anchor ourselves more deeply in the interlinking threads that make out the fabric of his criminal psychology. So we're now going to zoom out a little bit. You recognize who that is? And we're still dealing with the same thing, the moment of truth.
Vis-a-vis love.
Trinity.
Apropos, she entered the fundamental flaw is no. Which brings us at last to the moment of truth wherein.
Okay, so let us continue. We're now going to go through those same 4 questions, slow down even more. Who was the odd one out? So I posed that question as the #1 clue we all missed in one of my first videos of this case, and that was on November 22nd. I was trying to find someone who felt excluded and on the outside. This question is the toughest in true crime and takes the longest to really figure out. Who is someone really? What is going on the inside in their hearts and minds? I mean, does anyone really know you? How many people have really known you in your life? That is the material that we are preoccupied with right now. Who is someone really? But kind of in a philosophical sense, in a sorry, where's my comment? In a psychological sense, who is someone? What makes someone who they are? What makes someone different to somebody else? What are their connections to their world, and more pertinently, their disconnections and dysfunctions? Primarily, though, when we ask the question, who was the odd one out? The question is simply a who question. Sorry, it's not simply a who question, but who is particularly odd, and odd in what way, right? Sorry, I didn't really reread that part very well. Let me try again. Let me just put this up. Let me read that again. So primarily, though, the question is simply a who question, but who is particularly odd? The who is particularly odd here, but odd in what way? So I think I've got something to play you guys here. I think I must just do that.
Some things are a little odd with him. He was always like he had to be like the #1 person in the room.
Over the years with Kohberger in Pennsylvania.
He said some things are a little odd with him. He was always like he had to be like the #1 person in the room.
Over the years.
Okay. So he was particularly odd, and odd in what way? Is the police suspect in this case particularly odd? So we say, who is the odd one out? But was he particularly odd? Was he the odd one out, but particularly the odd one out? Odd in what way? Was he odd looking? Was he odd sounding? Was he odd in his background? How was he odd? Now we go to the next one. How is it personal? The question is really, how is it personal to the perpetrator, not necessarily to the victims? So one way to address that is via the merits of the first question. Was being odd a personal issue for the suspect? So, you know, when you say, who is the odd one out? Do you realize kind of what you're doing is you are just saying, okay, who is it? That's really all you're saying. What you really want to be asking is, was being odd a personal issue for the suspect? What was the experience like being odd? Was it pleasant? how long had the oddness struggle, the struggle to fit in, or the struggle with being left out, how long did it go on? Did others perceive him as odd? Did he express love to someone or several people outside of his family, and was it not returned? More importantly, did he absorb, accept, and internalize the assessment of society? So from that question, how was it personal? Think about how personal this is. Did he eventually absorb? Yeah, that's a good point, Yvonne. It was painful. If it's painful, it's personal. Did he eventually absorb, accept, and internalize what society's contempt for him? Did he basically say, you know what, I see that this is going on? And the answer is, of course he did, because he lost weight. He stopped taking drugs. But at some point it went beyond that. He accepted it, but in a kind of an inverted way. He said, you know what? I can also have contempt for you. The same contempt you've got for me, I can have for you. The same, I'm not good enough for you. You're not good enough for me. You're not good enough for my world. And that is the psychological mechanism where he regains his power. Where at the bottom of that, he says, I'm just going to flip this whole thing on its head. And I'm now at the top and you're going to be at the bottom. Simple as that. Okay, and now the third question, what is he trying hardest to demonstrate? If you look at that picture, what is he trying hardest to demonstrate? It starts off with, I'm normal, I'm valid, I'm good enough, I'm just like you, right? But as time goes by, it's obvious he's not normal, he's different. Now the only way to reach power is by demonstrating some sort of ability. Well, how about as the smartest person in the room? You know, I'm odd, I'm not good enough, but if I'm the smartest person in the room, doesn't that make me good enough? Doesn't that make me acceptable? What if I'm the smartest person in the room, say someone who knows the criminal mind, like Sherlock Holmes, right? What if I become that person? Will you then respect me? And so let me ask you a question. Didn't he succeed to some extent in this? In this perception, and I've dealt with it in the previous video I did, in this perception of Brian, as a smart dude. Do you think he succeeded to some extent in demonstrating that? Teresa says, yes, I've got my intelligence. So many who described Kohberger in the simplest terms called him intelligent. It's one of the first things that they sort of thought. And that's why I did this primer, just so that this would be sort of at the top of your mind, right? He was described as brilliant by his previous lecturer. I mean, he really stood out. He wasn't just a good student. He was, yeah, we have covered this, right? Have a look at this. This is an image of him and his sister. Does he get a sense, even through his own sister, of how he doesn't measure up in the social game? So he's trying to be someone, thanks a lot, Benzo. He's trying to be someone because he's so smart. But the question comes up, does he feel some pressure that perhaps from his own sister, that he doesn't measure up in the social game? So does she have boyfriends? Does she get jobs in movies? Is she living a fairly happy life? Well, how is he in relation to her? Look at the look in Kohberger's eyes in both these images, and look at the look in her eyes. Does she seem happier, just generally? From the little we know, does she seem happier? So this was the movie that his sister acted in. It was called 2 Days Back, right? And if you look at the sort of fabric of the movie, it's within a sort of forest setting and all these houses and whatever. Did you know that in the mythos of the story, his sister is one of the survivors? So you have this weird parallel where a lot of people die, and then there some survivors. This is in terms of 1122 King Road. And in this movie that his sister acted in, a lot of people die, but his sister survives. You have the same situation. How many crimes can you think of, high-profile crimes, where it's a case that someone died, but someone survived? You don't really get that sort of ever. Like in the Suzanne Morphew case, like her daughters weren't at home. Suzanne Morphew died, that's it. In the Chris Watts case, everybody died. In the O.J. Simpson thing, the two victims who were present died. It wasn't that one person died, another one survived. In the Mo Wilson case, Kate and Armstrong, Mo Wilson died. That's it. You don't have kind of high-profile cases where someone dies but somebody else survives. That makes this case singularly pretty incredible. And so you've got that same fabric repeating in this movie that his sister acted in. Does that mean anything? Well, we're not sure. What we are asking is, in terms of the question, what is he trying hardest to demonstrate? Well, is he trying hard to demonstrate something related to, or in the context of his sister, a family member who is happy and functional and whatnot? Does he feel a sense of competition to her? When you were in your 20s studying, was the were the achievements of your siblings relevant to your parents and to you, vis-a-vis your own achievements? So now we come back to the vital question, and I want to come back to this image of sorry, I want to come back to where is he? I want to come back to this image. What need does he serve by killing? It's the second time we're dealing with it. We've got one more time. He cheats the difficult process of proving himself by forcing the scales. In other words, if he can't earn power, and it seems like he can't, it seems like no matter what he's done to try and earn it, then what is the final alternative? Well, isn't it, I'll take it by force? And he does it with a knife, not only to show what a badass he is, but also because he wants to experience his agency being reborn. He wants to actually experience coming alive. He wants to experience their pain. and he wants to experience a sense of his own agency and his own coming into his own at the same time. He wants that experience. He doesn't want to avoid it. He wants that experience. And because he's such an odd and anal individual, because he's been that for so long, he wants to take sadistic pleasure in taking away, in destroying their agency. This isn't just killing someone, it's taking away their agency. I mean, in the most destructive, permanent way that is possible. He wants to permanently destroy their agency and thereby get his own, and he wants to enjoy that. Does that resonate with you? It is a sadistic crime, and where you have sadism, you also have someone who's living an anal life, a very like colorless. It's almost like if you literally imagine someone playing with feces. It's someone who doesn't enjoy life the way most of us do or should, with living things in nature, things that are moving. He likes things that are rigid, things that are controlled. His diet's controlled. Everything is under this sort of control. Everything is dead, right? And so he wants to come alive by killing, by taking sadistic pleasure in destruction and in death. That's how he can come alive. That's how he understands coming alive. Because we are dealing with an anal personality. So, of course, in the pursuit of his own dark fairy tale, where within his giddy moment where he proves how slick and stealthy he is, he actually ends up proving the opposite. And what I found kind of amusing, but maybe not so amusing, in the previous video I was saying, brilliant criminal mastermind, 6 stupid mistakes, meant in a very sarcastic way. Incredibly intelligent genius makes incredibly stupid mistakes. I'm trying to mock his intelligence. People were saying, how can you say he's intelligent? Well, that's exactly what I'm saying. That's exactly my argument. But the crime itself, ironically, was his attempt to prove how slick he was, how stealthy he was, and it ended up proving the opposite. Instead of proving how strong and powerful and clever he is, he proves what a weak and dumb person he was to begin with. Not only within the crime, but always. Weren't people right to think he was odd and strange and whatever? He ends up running out of the house. He runs out of his own fantasy halfway through. This is something he's premeditated. He runs out of his own construct halfway through it, back into the frigid air, the yapping of a dog receding in the distance. And I want to deal with this aspect in a slightly different way. How and why does the Lecter allegory not quite apply? It doesn't quite fit. Do you remember Dr. Lecter said, do you think if you saved Catherine, you could make them stop? Do you think if Catherine lives, you won't wake up in the dark ever again to the screaming of the lambs? Do you remember that? Now, unlike FBI agent Clarice Starling, the killer here doesn't want to save anyone anymore, right? Let me read that again. Dr. Lecter says to the agent, do you think if you saved Catherine, you could make them stop? Do you think if Catherine lives, you won't wake up in the dark ever again to the screaming of the lambs? Unlike that agent, the killer here doesn't want to save anyone else anymore. He wants to save himself. Do you get that? Why? Because he's experiencing a social death. And he wants to come alive. And this is the only way he knows to do that. Above all, he wants to save himself. And if those kids that he loathes so much for exposing his worthlessness, if they die, he won't wake up in the dark ever again to the screaming of the lambs. So imagine this idea of, let me bring myself back a little bit. Imagine this idea of you've been haunted, tortured, humiliated, mocked, invalidated by these people that you've been looking at, right? And of course, it's actually going on in his mind, but you have been tortured and haunted and tormented by these people that you see. You see them sort of moving in and out. You hear the chatter. You see the social media, right? It's torture, right? How can you not wake up in the dark ever again to that torture, to the screaming of the lambs? Well, if he kills them, he can assuage the guilt of his own feces. He can get rid of his own unlived life, and he can emerge as a hero who has outwitted, outplayed, and outsmarted an entire community. What a resetting of the scales that could be. And that's what he wants. He wants to massage his bruised and battered self-esteem. It's a little bit like this elephant in this cartoon. Right? And if you look at that, you can't help saying, "Cheapers, that's pathetic." So the 4 questions in reverse order are: what need does he serve by killing? Power lost through covetousness. In terms of the affidavit, we see a man in a mask, dressed in black at night, invisible. So we have a man behind a mask who's invisible, mouth, nose covered, hooded eyes exposed. A man who has no mouth, who can't talk, but who sees and feels nonetheless. A man who arrives with a knife. Why a knife? What does a knife do? A knife cuts. A mind can also be incisive. A mind can also come up with incisive thinking. Number 3, what is he trying hardest to demonstrate? Power. By getting a PhD and being called a doctor, he hopes to buck the system and move from the bottom back to the top. But does it work? How is it personal? Well, he lost power. He was bullied. This is a long story coming from a long way back. Who is the odd one out? To be the odd one out means you have no power. Exposed for being odd, and on that basis, his power is taken away from him. It's social power, but in a school and university setting. There really is no other currency but social currency or status in that setting. And so here it is. So I'm going to put these in chat in order, but sort of simplified. Number 4, what need does he serve by killing? Well, power lost through covetousness. See if you agree with them. Number 3, what is he trying hardest to demonstrate? Power. And part of that is by getting a PhD and being called a doctor. Number 2, how is it personal? Well, because of lost power, because he was bullied. Who was the odd one out? To be the odd one out means you have no power. Okay. In order to surgically find our way into the operative criminal psychology, we can't merely have the right answers. All of us have the same, sorry, all of us have got the same set of information, right? So it doesn't help to say, oh, he was invalidated, he was jealous. That's not going to be good enough. all of us have got the same set of information. So what separates the men from the boys is knowing not the answers, but the right questions to ask. Those 4 questions are: who is the odd one out? How was it personal to him? What is he trying hardest to demonstrate? What need does he serve by killing? Were these the right questions and the best questions to ask in this case, right? And so what is the word that summarizes the motive in one single word? Thanks a lot, Sandra. Thank you. So it's up to you now to evaluate and say, you know what, I agreed with that. I didn't really think that that was true, whatever. But what I want you to do now is, if you have written something down where you wrote down, I think that the motive was this or that or the next thing, right? I want you now to go and look at that again and write down the same question. This is why I think he did it. And then write down the one word at the other end of us having dealt with this. And so the question is, has your thought process changed? If so, how? Let us know in the comments. Okay. And now with the conclusion, right? I did say, how do we bring all of this back to us, right? That's also very important. So in conclusion, coveting is very common. Most of us probably covet somewhere in some slight way every day. So can you see how what we've done here is we've taken basically ordinary human psychology, right? Coveting is very typical, right? I think it's very hard to look at any social media and not covet something somewhere along the way every single day, or to watch TV, or to watch a movie, right? Or to watch music videos or whatever it is, right? But you can take something that is so commonplace, right? And by a particular criminal psychology being aggravated within that, it can go totally, it can get totally out of hand, right? In the same way, you could say, like in the Chris Watts case, you could say, you got to be kidding me. Is this just because this guy was having an affair? Yes and no. It starts with that. It starts with an affair. This starts with coveting. And it's that thing that I've said to you guys before. A grain of sand can break a machine. One false note can ruin an entire symphony. So if you can't interrupt that process of destructive thinking, you can end up going down a very destructive path. And it's up to you to interrogate your own psychology, to say, you know what, this is what I've been thinking about a lot. It's not good. And coveting is just one area where you can say, you know what, I do recognize that I've been doing that. And maybe I've been doing it excessively. Or maybe I know someone else that has, right? And so you can take what has happened in this case and you can actually learn from it and apply it yourself. And if you think, you know what, I don't really think I need to apply it to myself, just mark my words, what I'm saying now. Think about coveting the very next time you covet. The very next time you're feeling a sense of, I want that, but you know what, I'll never have it, or you're coveting. Try not to do that. Try and turn that negative into a positive. Try and interrupt that with something that is positive and affirmative. Less comparison, more what can I do? Who can I be? Who am I already, right? So how can we stop? How do you stop wanting what you don't have? Simple. Simple, maybe not necessarily easy. Just change your focus. Spend less time on particular social media that makes you feel unhappy. Rediscover a balance, but of course, first of all, acknowledge that you're not balanced, right? I'm not having a balanced life. okay, how are you going to rediscover? Maybe I need to go to gym more, get more exercise. Remember who you are and be true to yourself. This is a very rare and wonderful trait in a world that is filled with so much fakery. It's a fake world filled with fake people. Just being real, just being true to yourself is really a wonderful quality, and it helps other people to do the same. One person being brave enough and silly enough and weird enough to be true to themselves gives everyone else permission to start trying to do the same thing. So instead of that, sorry, where is it now? Instead of that, do edifying things. Be brave, find your courage, stop comparing yourself. These are all ways to stop coveting. These are all things that could have helped the perpetrator here. Be brave. Life's not easy. Be brave. Stop comparing yourself. Slow down and be grateful. Be grateful that where you are. Be grateful on your own terms, not somebody else's. Cultivate patience. Things don't need to change immediately. Things don't have to be a certain way right now. Trust in the process. Trust that things can change, and also for the better. But also do something. Find meaning in the little things. Grow in the areas you are good at. Grow in the area you're not good at as well. One thing I think Brian could have done with is exercise. I think if it was someone who jogged regularly, and if he had a positive passion, a positive way of investing his energy, positive or negative, that would have been a way to vent, to rebalance himself. Find a way to be productive or to do or to achieve something. So don't be caught up in voyeurism and the mental gnawing and the spectating and all of that. Find something to do, because that's how you can be. That's how you become something, become someone. Don't make excuses for not doing or not being. Make excuses for being or doing something, right? Find a way to be productive. Find something to do. And then this is very important, and it's something that is becoming harder and harder to do in our society. Filter out the noise. You've got to actively filter out the noise. You've got to say, you know what, it's not healthy for me to consume this because it makes me unhappy, because it makes me covet, because it makes me feel powerless and helpless. And I can actually take control. I can regain some power and some agency simply by closing off that noise, simply by not paying attention to that. I can turn my own attention into a powerful tool where the thing that I pay attention to, if it encourages me and strengthens me, well, then I become encouraged, I become strengthened. If I pay attention to things that are negative and break me down and discourage me and make me feel anxious, well, then that's what happens, right? How does that saying go? As I think I am, or what you think you are, right? So then take thinking that's not edifying, take that out of the equation and think on not just positive thinking, shouldn't only be that, but filter out the noise, filter out the nonsense, bring good things into your experience, nature, animals, fresh air, exercise, travel, new experiences, color, creativity, positivity, positive people, right? All of that kind of thing. Yeah, that's it. I think therefore I am. Thanks a lot, Fractured Fairies. It's quite an interesting name. Thanks. And I think this sort of sums it up. You know, in terms of what you pay attention to, can you guys see that? His ring shows he's married. Facebook says he's married. Would it kill you to flirt and message someone else? Sincerely, wife and kids. That's just a sort of jokey way of saying, don't you really want to pay attention to something worthwhile rather than going down some sort of negative path, right? Do you really want to go down that negative path? Would it kill you to flirt somewhere else? And that's basically pay attention to something else more worthwhile, right? Okay, so now to summarize. So this is the test. Again, it's not whether we can integrate all the information with the fabric of this case, the facts, the evidence, the dynamics, the victimology into a cogent motive. It's not whether we can do that. It's how well we are able to express the operant criminal psychology within the authentic identity of the perpetrator. Have we done that? And it's not whether it resonates, but how well, how effective is our explanation and thus our analysis? And thus, how effective is our explanation? How effective would you say is this explanation? So that's the question we're going to be asking and repeating. And over time, we're going to be trying to fine-tune and improve this hypothesis that we put down. And hopefully, if it's an effective presentation, it will stand the way it is, not like 100% the way it is, but let's say for the most part, the way that it is. It was an incisive analysis. And that's the challenge for me and for this channel, to say we don't have all the information. We have a lot of information, and we've done this before. We know how to recognize those patterns. Can we synthesize all of that with expert knowledge in criminal psychology and a lot of experience at pattern recognition in intertextuality? Are we able to take all of that and synthesize it in a very, very credible explanation when it comes to motive? Can we, right? And then what do you say to that? It's kind of a rhetorical question, but it's also a question that we ask you, and you say, did we succeed? We set a very high standard. Do we succeed in reaching that standard? Did we come close, or did we actually meet the standard? So let's have a look at the poll. Well, it's down to just 51%. 51% say, I see over 2,000 have voted. 51% say, in terms of, do you think motive is the most important thing to be thinking about right now? In this case, 50%, well, down to 50% say, we do want to know why. 31% say, leave it to the experts. You're not an expert, leave it to the experts. And then 10% say, it's obvious, isn't it? Isn't the motive obvious here? Do you think, did you think that the motive here was power? That this crime is all about power, a demonstration of power? Or do you also think, no, it's way too soon even to be thinking about it, you shouldn't think about it? 9% of you say that. Anyway, thanks very much for participating. By the way, Pamela Lindemann, thanks so much for that. That's really kind and generous of you. Appreciate it. It's a really nice feeling coming to the end of this presentation and seeing that. It's a really good feeling. I almost postponed this. My dog was attacked earlier today. I lost half of my, or a third of my previous video. The edit was just sort of scrubbed when the automatic save happened. And I've been suffering with really chronic lower backache right? Just from trying to really get this narrative laid down. It just requires a lot of effort and concentration. So it's really gratifying. I really appreciate that. Pamela, thanks so much. I hope you guys have found this, especially those who are new to this channel, I hope you found this worthwhile. I hope you found this interesting and worth your time. I also hope you found it totally different. Like, wow, I didn't know this was on YouTube. I hope you found it completely different to anything you've ever seen before. Something very authentic, very original, and then hopefully also quite incisive. I think I share a little bit of the Brian Kohberger thing of, I also want to demonstrate my agency to some extent by saying, I'm not stupid. I know a little bit about what I'm talking about, right? But it's up to you guys to decide whether that makes sense or not. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Is it true? Isn't it? And also, as more and more information comes to light, we will see whether that's the case or not. There may be other things that we don't know that that sort of elevate in significance. We'll see. Thanks a lot, Run the World. Glad you enjoyed it. Thanks a lot, Robin. That's a nice compliment. Thanks. Thanks, guys. Thank you. Does anyone want to see Timmy? Thanks a lot, Yvonne. Thanks a lot for all the feedback on Patreon. I really appreciate it, guys. Thanks, Terry. Yeah, it is deep. It is deep. Thanks, Colleen. It reminds me of a lecture hall. I actually was saying that to someone. Yeah. So there's one more thing I want to do before we go, and I want to bring up a comment that someone else made. See if I can find it. Here it is. Okay. I just want to deal with this as kind of the last thing. So this was a comment that was actually emailed to me. Can you comment on the disparity of Brian being a strict vegan and his killings to be extremely gruesome? Right? Can you comment on, she says, the disparity, it's kind of the contradiction of someone who's a strict vegan and this sort of extremely bloody, you know what. And I think I have, my commentary is basically, he's a very anal character. And the vegan thing isn't really, how can I put it? It's not that he's a balanced, happy, connected person and is a vegan. The vegan is almost a symptom of all the excessive control and isolating and oddness. It's not also just being a vegan, it's a very strict vegan, right? And it's all of that that ends up feeling like actually a living death, right? And so the killings actually correlate to that perfectly. So you can see it in that sense that there's actually a correlation between that strictness, right? Between that excessive control and fixation and obsession with eating in a certain way and the other things in his life. Bear in mind, before he was a vegan, he was a heroin addict, you know. You can either see correlation or you can see contradiction. You can say there's a contradiction going on here, but that contradiction, in other words, strict vegan, I don't want to hurt animals. I don't want an animal to bleed or to be hurt for my benefit, right? I don't want to eat an animal. I don't want an animal to get hurt, but then why am I hurting people, right? You might say there's a contradiction there, but there's also a contradiction in the idea of someone who's studying criminology to pursue criminals, to pursue justice, to fight the innocent, and then actually take that knowledge and kill people and try and use that knowledge against justice. It's a contradiction. So I think there's correlation and contradiction in the same person. I think this is a very complicated person, and ultimately what that boils down to is a person who got so muddled and caught up and confused in his own cleverness that he ended up losing his power and his agency. I hope that's a good enough explanation for you. Cookie Cat says, how's Timmy? He was attacked by an Alsatian. I told the whole story on Patreon, but it was pretty harrowing. I actually thought my dog was going to die. But anyway, he's okay. I'll call him over in a moment. Riches in Family, thanks so much for that as well. Thanks a lot for the super chats. Terry, good to have you here. All the new members. Is Stephanie still here? I realize it might be quite late where Stephanie is. There you are. Good to have you here. SM Kovalinsky as well. SM Kovalinsky's been an absolute behind-the-scenes hero. Thank you so much for all of your support, all of your research. So, thanks so much. I'm also happy my dog's okay. Well, 3 hours. This is quite a big thing to get through. Liesel's actually just come back from holiday. You guys must ask her where she's been. I'm sure she's can't wait to tell you. She's gone on quite an exotic holiday. Yeah, no, that is a good feeling. Thanks a lot. Let's see if we can get Timmy in the house. Timmy, come. Come, boy. Timmy, come. It's your hero moment. Come, boy. Come. So if you guys want to know, I took Timmy for a walk, and Timmy, you coming out of the field of vision, and straight out of the gate, a really big Alsatian went after him, maybe about 30 seconds after we sort of entered this sort of area. There were just a lot of dogs, big dogs in the area, and just out of nowhere, this big Alsatian went for the back of his neck. And even though I'm touching his neck here, he doesn't wince, so he's obviously not got any sort of permanent damage. I don't know if he's even bruised. And I'm touching his neck now. I think if there was injury, he would feel it, right? So I don't think that's the case. I think that was actually a display of power from that Alsatian. You don't just join us without asking permission. Who are you, cocky little dog, to just think you can just come in and, assert your place? The big dog is going to show you your place, and that's, I think, what that is all about. But I mean, I actually had to pull that Alsatian off my dog a second time, and I really thought, by the way he had his jaws clamped right over his neck and the sound he was making and how big he was, I thought I might actually lose my dog. And so I was really surprised that there wasn't any obvious injury, actually. I think it was just a show of demonstration. It was him demonstrating his power. Yeah, so anyway, that is it. Thanks so much, Lisa Breck. Really appreciate it. I'm also glad that I hadn't shaved Timmy, because I was going to shave him. And I'm glad I didn't, because it just meant he had a bit of extra coat to protect him against these big jaws on him. He definitely was shaken. I don't think he's ever had that nasty an experience with a much bigger dog. And so for quite a while, you could see he was shaken. He wanted me to pick him up. I did pick him up. And he kept a wide berth. You could see he was definitely shaken. And then as we made the end of the circuit, there were still 3 Alsatians on the field, a couple of other dogs as well, all big dogs, which is a little bit unusual. But the dog that had bitten him had left with the owner. And but I still wasn't really sure if I really wanted to put him potentially in harm's way again. But the people that were there, I think, were like, "Are you okay?" And they wanted to reassure me and just see if my dog was okay. And it turned out one of the Alsatians there was coming off heat, and so it was not quite good to see Timmy find his feet again, find his mojo. So I think it was maybe a good lesson for him. I think he's realized, that he's quite a confident dog, but there are bigger dogs out there, and you must sometimes be aware of that, and you must sometimes ask permission to join the group, and so more than likely you will, right, Timmy? Just ask permission to join the group. Okay. Okay, we're fair. Okay. Okay, I think that's it from me. Joanne says, weren't any of the dogs on a leash? It's sort of an enclosed area where none of the dogs on a leash, but I did ask her to put the dog on a leash. So yeah. Definitely lots of love for the mascot, definitely. Thanks a lot. Yeah, definitely. The owner said, she said, is your dog okay? And I just said, I think you need to put your dog on a leash. And then she left. I mean, that was the end of her walk. But I mean, she did leave the area. Yeah. So what I'm going to do following up on this live is we're going to go deeper into Brian's journey. We're going to go through some of the social media that it appears. I don't know for a fact that it's his, but at this point, some of the people that have looked at it believe it is. I think that it is as well. So we're going to tentatively go into his social media and try and get a deeper sense of a very troubled person. You really get a sense of someone who is, if you say, I think he was not very happy, you get it, you get Brian in his own words, you get that unhappiness in his own words, and that's quite different. You really get a deep sense of wherever it was that he came from. And so that is where we're going to venture in terms of our analysis from here. Still in the motive, but we're trying to get closer to the core of this identity, this person that we are trying to intuit. And that's the route that we're going to take. So that's something to expect on this channel tomorrow or the next day. Dover says, I've got to say good night. I'll rewatch this tomorrow. Well, this is the end of the show, but good night. Take care. UK lady says, I adore your updates. Critical thinking is a great skill. Critical thinking is a skill we can all apply. We can definitely all apply it. If Brian had applied it, sitting there, should I really be sitting here doing this? Isn't there maybe a better use of my time? Yeah, you should have. I must say, I was so surprised that Alsatian didn't actually harm my dog. I mean, scared the living crap out of him, but apparently didn't actually harm him at all. So in a way, it's quite a nice guy dog. Did a horrible thing, scared the crap out of us, but actually did so in a way that was ultimately gentle. I mean, I think it was a show of force. I mean, I pulled at his coat trying to get him off. And it was terrifying to watch, but I think ultimately it was just teaching my dog a lesson. And I think we succeeded, right? Thanks a lot, Gian. Thanks. Such is life, for sure. Okay, guys, thanks everyone for being here. We had 3:15. I think this is a good place to sign off. Again, thanks, mods. You guys are the best. Members, new subscribers, welcome. Super chats, I'm very grateful. Thank you very much. Take care, guys. See you guys next time. Ciao.